Hey there, and welcome to another episode of The Bible. Wait, what? Yes, this is the podcast that unravels the mysteries of the Bible's most perplexing, puzzling, and thought-provoking passages. My name is Rohan, and each session I'm joined by a member of our team at C3 Church Camden, Picton, and Thirroul as they quiz me on some of the more complicated, confusing, challenging, and even confronting passages that we read in our weekly Bible reading plan. We understand that reading the Bible can be a challenging and perplexing experience. Many people just don't know where to start, they get confused, and so they give up. Well, that's why this podcast exists, to equip you with the tools and the knowledge to explore the richness and depth of the Bible for yourself. So grab your Bible, take a deep breath, and join us as we explore this week's passages. To learn more about us or to get in touch with us at C3 Church Camden, Picton and Thirroul, visit any of our three locations websites. That's c3camden.church, c3picton.church and c3thirroul.church. Or you can follow us on Facebook, Instagram and YouTube just by searching for any of our locations' names. So without any further delay, let's dive into today's conversation.
Hello out there, dear listeners.
Hello, Kenny.
And hello to Pastor Rohan.
Hi, Kenny.
It's
Pull
been
that
a while.
microphone a bit closer to you.
It's been a while.
It has been a while.
I can't remember. But anyway,
We
we're
had some
back.
fun with Joshua. What else did we do a Christmas one? But this is the first one this year for you, isn't it?
First one this year.
Yeah.
And it's been a while. Anyway,
We're here.
it is the Bible. Wait, what?
Hey, that was pretty good,
I've been
Kenny.
practicing.
You've been practicing on the car on the way over. We're recording at my house today.
And it's a beautiful day.
It is.
Beautiful Friday, which we've both agreed is a good day for us.
Yep.
So here we are.
Yeah, we're in the book of Deuteronomy.
Today's actually my Sabbath day, or what I put down as my Sabbath day. So
So you're actually kind of working? Or
I don't call this working at all.
This is learning. This is
Yeah.
study. This is reflection.
I
for
think
you.
there's no other way I'd like to spend some of my Sabbath.
Cool. Well, I'm glad that we're here. I always enjoy our conversations with you, Kenny. I love the way you ask really, really thought-provoking questions.
I
Yes.
don't know if I do. The more I listen to the podcast, how was I trying to describe it? I've just been talking to Rohan how I sit around a fire most nights at the moment and I just think, and it's been my new, what I call the bush TV.
Yeah.
And I've been thinking about where I'm at with the Bible because it's good to find out where you're at, you know? And I feel like I've come quite a way, but I listen to some of the people that you have on here and I feel like, well, I've got a lot to learn still. But it's great that I am learning.
You are still learning. That's the key.
Yeah.
Yep, we're all still learning. Hey,
I had a
feel that
certain way I
every
wanted
day.
to like a person on a marathon or whatever.
Yeah.
And I was or training for a marathon.
Yep.
And I haven't got that many Ks up yet, but I'm
All you got to do is stay in the race, Kenneth.
That's it.
That's the key.
that's a great way to put it.
I feel like, I was studying again this morning. I was just saying to you off air, I've only done a couple of chapters of my regular Bible reading in Jeremiah today because I wanted to go back and refresh these chapters.
Yep.
And I just feel like every time I study or read or listen to a podcast or something, I get fresh stuff. So I keep learning. So yeah, let's just all keep learning together.
Let's all keep learning. Yeah. And I think also some of the ways which you've been teaching through the podcast to look at certain things in the Bible and say, yes, I could imagine it to be that way, or there could be another meaning has really helped as well.
Yep.
And you don't have to actually say, I'm deciding to believe in this. You can just keep it all the mixture in and then go back to Jesus, basically.
Yes, yeah, that's right. You don't have to be hard and fast on a lot of the Bible.
Yeah.
There's very small amount of things that are really particular that we need to, hold to as fundamental. A lot of it is just open to reflection. It's like a multifaceted diamond. We can see its beauty in multiple different ways.
Yeah. And in talking to other people, probably not non-believers, and I've spoken about the Bible now, I say, I'm seeing it differently and I'm studying it, and I go into a bit about the context and stuff because a lot of non-believers would just go straight into what about this? What about
what
that?
about God killing all the people? What we're going to
And
do
I'll
talk
say,
about
well,
today.
it's really about how you look at it. And I've been studying it, not that I'm the full bottle on it all, but I'm learning to look at it a different way and to understand it a different way so that you don't just look at it and go, well, that means that.
Yeah, great. That's really
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's the right way to do it, to keep yourself open-minded and stay a student.
And today we are jumping into Deuteronomy.
Yeah, we're in the chapter 6 to 11, so the second week of Deuteronomy. I don't think I've recorded the first week yet. I haven't as we write this. So I have recorded some other Deuteronomy from later on, but not this one yet because we're recording all out of sync.
And I must admit, as usual, when I saw Deuteronomy, I said, that's one of the ones that I probably put on extra fast if I was listening to it, because there seems to be a lot of repeating about stories.
Well, the word deuter means two, so
that's
it's
it,
already
yeah.
repeating, yeah.
But I did a little bit of study on it, and I guess I've looked at it. It's a bit more exciting to me, even just what I've done, because it's Moses talking to a new generation of Israelites.
Yes.
And instead of like just thinking, oh, here's Moses, why is he just saying this over and over again?
Because last time we read it was 40 years ago.
That's right.
Yeah.
And the more I've looked into it, it's kind of a poignant moment. It's Moses standing in front. I don't know how many. I was going to ask how many Israelites would there have been at this time, because it wasn't.
The book of there's a census done after the 40 years.
Yeah.
I'm not sure of the figure, but we're talking hundreds of thousands, if not millions, probably. Yeah, we're talking about a lot of people.
So it's kind of a big deal.
Yes.
I know it towards the end of the chapters we're doing, they say that it started with a certain amount of people, like 70 or something.
Oh, yes. Originally when Jacob went into Israel, into Egypt, yes.
But now I'm imagining Moses, standing in front of all
multitudes.
these people and saying, look, this is how we've come, and we're about to walk into the land of milk and honey.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, it's his big pep talk before he he heads off to be with the Lord.
That's right.
Passes on, yeah.
It's pretty awesome. It's Deuteronomy is the 5th book in the Bible.
Yep.
And the final book of the Torah.
Mm-hmm.
And I just wanted to touch base on the Torah and why it ends there. And is that what the Jews only study?
Good question. Some of the Jews, the Sadducees, the ones in the time of Jesus, the Sadducees only believed in the Torah, the books of Moses.
Yep.
But most of the other Jews held to the Psalms and the prophets and the historical writings and all that. Pretty much by the time of Jesus, apart from the Sadducees, most of the Jews would have held to what we would regard as our Old Testament.
And is that what the Sadducees did their laws on, or moved their weird laws around with?
That was the Pharisees, and that did all the strange traditions and laws that they were the rabbis. Most of that was commentary on the written rules, all these laws, this Torah. Actually, the word Torah, Torah, just is translated as law in our English Bible.
Oh, okay.
But it really just means teaching or instruction.
Yeah.
So it's just a rule that's an instruction. So don't cook a goat in its mother's milk. That's Torah. Now it's teaching because it's supposed to teach us something about why would God say that, that sort of thing. So they then interpreted these rules in such a way that they wanted to put fences around fences around fences so they wouldn't break the Torah.
Yep.
So the answer to the original question is no, most Jews did hold to the whole Bible, but they held Moses and therefore these first 5 books, which they attributed to being written by Moses. And large portions of them certainly seem to speak from Moses' narrative, like most of Deuteronomy does.
Yeah.
Right at the end, it's going to tell us Moses went up on a hill and died and no one's found his body. So obviously he didn't write that. That's been edited in much later.
That's at the end of Deuteronomy?
I think so, yeah.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. Or it might even be the beginning of Joshua or somewhere in there. But it's been edited in later. But most of the books of the Torah are attributed to Moses, actually being the ones who wrote them down.
After reading these chapters, I think he might have died from starvation or the fasting.
He did a lot of fasting, didn't he? He certainly did. Yeah, he spent a lot of time fasting and crying out, Lord, what have you done?
That's one of my questions. How can a man possibly fast that long?
Yeah, 40 days.
I can't go for more than like 2 hours. So it was written around 1400 BC.
Yes, that's about right. Yep, that's
I
what
did
I
look
hold
at
to
the
that
Bible
view,
Project video, and I found that the Bible Project video on
the
Deuteronomy.
the one with
with the cartoons and they're really cool.
Yeah,
It's the
they
first time I've properly looked at them. And
that's the one where he tells the story and they draw it as he goes.
and the drawings come up, and
that's
really cool.
I've got that book actually. I've got a whole book.
Have you?
I don't know where it is. Probably under my coffee table over there. It's about this big.
Yeah,
about this big. Like you can't see it on the podcast, but it's the length. It's huge. It's big posters. It's sort of almost the length of my arm, not quite. And probably about.
It's got all the pictures,
and it's got all of those, all 66 of those pictures.
Yeah,
it's pretty cool. Yeah.
So Deuteronomy begins with Moses explaining the Torah. So sorry, one more thing about the Torah. Do they have a separate book that's just the Torah?
No, it's 5 different scrolls.
Oh, okay, scrolls.
Yeah, so Genesis is a scroll, Exodus is a scroll, Leviticus is a scroll, Numbers is a scroll, Deuteronomy is a scroll.
And is it Torah?
I don't know. Torah.
Sorry, listeners. This is information for Kenny.
I don't know how the Hebrews would say it. Torah. They would probably put on it. It'd be the emphasis would be on the I think, because that's the breath. Torah.
Okay.
I'd say something like that, but I'm not really certain.
Yeah.
Apologies to the Hebrew-speaking listeners out there. I don't know.
So Deuteronomy begins with Moses explaining the Torah to the new generation of Israelites after the last generation I've written here stuffed up royally in the wilderness after the exodus from Egypt.
They certainly did. It's really probably the first recorded sermons in the Bible, really, because he's basically elaborating on what he's already taught them in Torah. He's just commenting on it and teaching them about it,
That's why I can say that's why I thought of him standing up and delivering his sermon.
It's actually multiple probably sermonettes all joined together throughout the whole book of Deuteronomy, as the whole book covers pretty much one day. Like it's one giant speech. It's written that way. But yes, it's really an elaboration. You're right. He's standing up and he's dictating or he's preaching to the crowds.
And in reading it, there's a whole lot of your God and your God only and your God alone. But he's really he's putting that there as this is important, and I'm going to say it over and over again so that you get it.
There's a lot of repetition.
A
lot of the word Shema comes up a lot.
Oh yes, Shema.
You've got good notes in front of you. Let's just follow your notes rather than me jump ahead.
I also said a lot of Deuteronomy is laws or do's and don'ts, mostly to do with loving just the one God.
Yep.
A lot of which is repeated.
And most of those are contained probably in about chapters 12 to 24, something like that. So there's not as much of that in the chapters we're doing today, but you're giving a good framework to it there. Yeah.
Can you say Deuteronomy in Greek?
Deuteronomo? Something? Deuteronomo! No, that's Geronimo. I don't know. Deuteronomy? No, is it Deuteronomy? I don't know. What is it?
I can't say.
You can't say it.
But I heard it and I was just
Deuteronomo or something like that.
Something like that.
It means second law, doesn't it? I think from memory.
Does it mean second law or God alone? No? Do we need to chat GPT
We'd have to. I'm pretty sure Deutero means second.
Yep.
And whatever the Greek word is, let me just try.
Oh, yes. The word means the second law, yeah.
Second law, yeah. So because you've got Leviticus is the book of Leviticus is a large portion of law. It's probably where the most of the laws of the Torah are included. There's a few in the second part of Exodus after the 10 Commandments. There's a few in there. And there's a few in the book of Numbers, but they're often like a bit of a law and then a bit of a story to illustrate what happens if they don't abide by those laws.
Yep.
But Leviticus is really a lot of law. And then Deuteronomy is Moses now repeating that law. But he's actually changed. Some of it's repeat and some of it's
Leviticus
modified.
is a lot of weird law.
Yeah. There's not as much of the weird law in Deuteronomy. The reason I wanted to choose Deuteronomy over Leviticus to do as a church is I think it gives us an understanding of how to read law, how to read these Old Testament laws without getting bogged down into so many individual laws.
Yeah.
And hopefully if we can get some of the tools that we apply here in Deuteronomy and see the narrative and what God's saying about moving in to take the promises of God and so on, we can then apply those back to Leviticus when we read it as well.
Very good.
Yeah.
So, how have I written this? The story so far, the highlights how rebellious and the previous generation was. This is what Moses is talking about, in contrast to God's constant grace and provision in the wilderness.
Yes.
Yes, I like that. So as we dive in, God is calling this generation to be more faithful than their parents were to the new covenant. Is the new covenant what he's outlining here? Or is it the 10 Commandments?
Yes and yes, I think.
Yeah?
Yes, I think the covenant is the 10 Commandments, and a commitment to live by those expansions of those 10 commandments. So all the other laws, all the other rest of the Torah is really a commentary. It's like an teasing out of the 10 commandments.
Nice.
So the 10 commandments is really 4 or 5 of them are about serving God, loving God.
Yep.
And the rest of them are about loving people.
Yep.
Jesus will come along and he'll comment on that and he'll say, all the law and the prophets is about loving God and loving your neighbor, right? So the rest of the laws tease out the 10 commandments, which is what we're saying here.
Yeah.
And Moses is going to come along and call them back to loving God and loving one another.
Beautiful.
And that's the covenant. The covenant is that we will love God and we will love one another.
Love it. And always when I'm reading scripture now, I'm trying to work out how it can work in my life and our lives.
Great.
And this one I was thinking how sometimes we can be out in the wilderness ourselves and be stubborn and rebellious.
Yep.
And also what other gods and idols that I might worship or, other people, in your life, what can become a god. And I realised while I was sitting around my fire studying a bit that better beer might be one of those.
Yeah, better beer could become one of an idol.
I don't have many, but I like to sit there and have a better beer. And I was thinking,
Well, lots of good things can become idols if we place them above the Lord in terms of them giving us some sense of purpose or meaning or fulfillment. We can enjoy those things, but we can't let them replace God. Recognize that God has given us those things to enjoy. And we're going to see that when we get to Deuteronomy 8. I think we're going to see that today, actually, where God calls them to enjoy the good things of the land, but never forget the Lord, the God who gave them the good things of the land.
Absolutely. Let's dive in, hey?
All right, we're going to go
chapter
to chapter 6.
I wanted to start by asking, I can't even say this word. What is Pentateuch?
Oh, Pentateuch.
Pentateuch.
That's just another name for the Torah or the first five books of the Bible. It's the English version, I think. Penta means 5.
Yep.
So I think it's probably here's my guess. It's the Latin version of the Torah. The Torah is the Hebrew version, and it's been translated probably through Latin.
Yep.
As Pent meaning 5, so it means first 5 books. That's all it means. So yes, if you hear the word Pentateuch, you're thinking Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. Now, I used to use Pentateuch all the time. These days, I tend to just say Torah.
I don't think I've ever heard it.
Haven't
That's
you?
why I asked.
Yep.
So they're on the Jordan River, on one side of the Jordan River.
Yep, they're on the eastern side. Yep.
And the Promised Land is
on the west, the other side of the river. Yep, that's right.
Which kind of spun me out that it's all there waiting for them, and they're just gonna.
Yeah.
And we'll get into that.
Yeah.
Moses starts by talking about commands, decrees, and regulations. They're all from his time in Mount Sinai.
Yes. These are the commands and things that he'd given. He's referring back to it. Says these are the commands, decrees, and regulations that the Lord God commanded me to give you. Yes, that's right. He's talking about everything we've read about in Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers. Yep.
Straight away, because in verse 2 and 3, he says, you and your children and grandchildren must fear the Lord your God as long as you live. If you obey all his decrees and commands, you will enjoy a long life. The cynic in me straight away thinks, but a lot of people don't. A lot of good people that follow laws don't enjoy a long life.
Yeah.
I had a conversation with my wife Amanda about this last night. She says it's Old Testament, and I'm like, but still bad things happen to good people.
Yes, the Psalms is full of the psalmists complaining about why bad things. The book of Job questions all of that sort of stuff. Ecclesiastes. So yes, you've got to see you've got to come up a level.
Yeah. And
see the grander narrative here, as opposed to just trying to make it all micro. Like every person who lives a good life will have a good thing.
I know.
Yeah, that's just the way we read it.
I try to, and then I'll go, but
yeah, but I know, and that's we have to train ourselves. Remember, this is an overarching narrative. This is not trying to say guarantee, watertight guarantee that hey, Kenny lives a good life. He lives good, he'll have a good life, right? And there's plenty of other scriptures. As I say, the whole book of Job is wrestling with that.
Otherwise, they'd have to go, except Job Blow, he's going to get cancer at 25.
Yeah. So this is talking at an upper level. And the other thing about this is actually, you need to map this onto the book of Genesis, the whole temptation. you're going to see a lot of similar language between what Moses says to the Israelites here and what God said to Adam and Eve, the man and the woman, in the garden.
I like that.
On the day you eat of that tree, you will die.
He's now going to the thread,
reverse. It's the thread. He's going to reverse the thing. He's going to say, if you obey my commands, you'll live. You'll live long. You'll have access to the tree of life. And now, obviously, they're not actually going to live forever.
Yeah.
But that's the narrative, the story that's being picked up here. The general principle is if we obey God and obey his commands, the result of that will be blessing, will be life.
Beautiful.
The result of that. And even if we don't live a long life, we live a blessed life, we live a full life, we potentially experience eternal life, ultimately experience eternal life. So, yeah, don't get microcosm it, come up a level.
That has shut the cynic in me up straight away.
And just see that bigger picture there.
He might come back a bit later.
He might. Oh, that's all right. I like a good cynic. I think, heck, we're going to tackle some chapters where if you're not cynical about these chapters, you haven't done your homework well enough. You're missing something when you start talking about God and violence and stuff like that. Yeah.
So I've got written here, you mentioned the Shema.
Yep.
Which means?
So it's in Deuteronomy 6:4.
Yeah.
And so this is repeated. Jews, modern day Orthodox Jews, in fact, probably a lot of Jews, even secular Jews would probably know this. Deuteronomy 6:4. Listen, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord alone, and you must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your strength. And you must commit yourselves to wholeheartedly give these commands I'm giving you today. So it's Shema, O Israel. Listen, O Israel.
Yep.
Hear, O Israel. Lord your God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind. And Jesus repeats this too.
Yeah.
This became the catchphrase, and it is today too. It's something that they repeat on rote every day. But it really means, Shema means more than listen. It means
I've put here, listen, hear, respond, obey.
Perfect. That's exactly right. It's an action
4
word.
points.
Yeah, exactly. It's a doing word.
Which I thought was great.
Yeah. We kind of get a little bit of that. You know, Amanda might say to you, "You're listening, but you're not hearing me."
Yes.
I don't know if you ever.
Oh, she does.
We intuitively know that hearing is more than listening. You can be listening, but not actually hearing, not actually absorbing, not actually engaging. And this is like another level again. This is now listening, absorbing, and then acting out, which is why it's actually linked. Shema is linked to obey. Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God. You should obey the Lord your God.
Yeah.
You can't really truly Shema without obedience.
Yeah, that's good. That's really good. Lord alone, one God, Israel, is to worship and obey. Like it. Lord alone.
Yeah, so this is your God. Remember Israel?
Yeah.
Because he's going to go on and he's going to tell them all about the gods of all the other nations that are in there that they're going to dispossess. And he's going to say, just remember, they're not your God, I'm your God.
Yeah, it's good. It says that a lot. So
yeah, repeated en masse.
Verse 8, why hands and foreheads? I guess, though, that's just a place where you would look. Because they're tying things, tie them to your hands and wear them on your forehead as reminders. Yeah,
so now you're stretching my mind. Because it says, put these words on your hands and foreheads. Now, the Pharisees, I think the Pharisees or the Sadducees literally did it.
Oh, really?
And I think many Orthodox Jews too. So have you ever seen an Orthodox Jew, they'll have a little box on their forehead and in there's little scriptures. Like they strap it on their forehead, I think, and they wear it on their
They push a button and it comes down in front of their eyes.
It comes down in front of their eyes. It's remote, yeah. And they take it literally. But if I'm right, I think the way I remember hearing this is that if you think about it, our hand is what we do stuff with.
Yeah.
And our forehead represent like a watch, yeah. And our forehead represents our thoughts.
Yeah.
So to have the law on our forehead and in our hands actually means that you're hearing and you're doing. I think that's the link. It's actually absorbing the law and doing the law.
Nice.
Yeah.
So it could almost be a poetic way to say it.
I think it's a poetic way of saying hear and do.
It also says doorposts of your house and on your gates.
Yes, and you'll often see this in Jewish movies and things where they'll have the law written on the door. They actually walk in through every little house, every doorway, and the Jews tap on a little post. I must have a little bit of law there or something. They tap on it every time they walk through a doorway.
Wow.
Yeah. So you can see how this can become ritualistic and empty of any value. And that probably is for most Jews, just walk in and tap and just don't even think about it. But it wasn't intended to be. It was meant to keep. Every time you walk through a door, you're supposed to think about me. I mean, imagine how many times if you did that, imagine how saturated with God's rules God's
I
ways you
know.
would be if every time you walked in and out of a door you did that.
You'd always have to be thinking. I remember when I lived with my Russian mother-in-law, who's Orthodox.
Yep.
They had some figures in the top corner of their rooms, and when they walked in, they would do a little bow to it
Okay.
or something.
You're right.
So every
So
time
there'll
they
be
walk
some
into the
Orthodox-
room,
yeah.
and I sort of got into habit to respect my
it would have been
mother-in-law.
like an icon or something.
Yeah, like
yes,
an
okay,
icon.
Yes, gotcha.
And
Yeah.
also because I was a very happily whistling guy, I wasn't allowed to whistle in the house, and she would.
Is that because that
catch
was
me-
kind of disrespectful?
I don't know. but
Probably.
she would catch me
yeah.
all the time and go,
Yeah.
Kirsha, which is my name in Russian.
Kirsha.
Kirsha, or Enikenti is Kenneth. So Enikenti
Enikenti.
means I'm really in
That
trouble.
sounds you're in trouble, Annie Kenty.
Because I'd just be walking around going, la-di-da, and she'd be like, Kirsha. And I'm like, oh, yeah. And I'd look up and go, oh, sorry.
yeah,
I don't
right.
really know what you mean.
What she was looking at. But so that's exactly what
Yeah.
we're talking about here.
Yeah.
That was what Moses was trying to get them to do, to basically imbibe every area of their life with a remembrance about God.
Yeah.
Shema, to remember. Because there's, remember will come up a lot too in Deuteronomy. Remember what I've done for you. Remember this, remember that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what was the city that they were getting given?
Not one city, they were going to get an entire land
Oh, wow. Full of cities.
full of cities. Yes. I'm sure we'll come back to the whole idea of them taking someone else's land later. But yes, they were going to inherit.
So God swore that he would give this land to the ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
Yes, so way back in the Genesis account, it was
prophesied.
prophesied. Yep,
This
before
would
they
happen.
even went to Egypt, before they came out of Egypt in the Exodus, right back 400 years before this,
That's
God
pretty
had
cool.
promised to Abraham, 430 years before this, probably, I guess it's 470 by now, God had promised to Abraham that they would have this land. Yes, and now they're standing on the precipice with the land that was promised to them on the other side of this river.
Wow. And the houses are all theirs, the wells are all theirs, the
Yes.
food, the cattle.
It's all there, yeah.
Yeah.
Which is totally different. They've been living as slaves in Egypt for a long time.
Yeah.
And then 40 years in the desert with just reliance on the manna.
Yeah.
And they've been a nomadic people living in tents,
Yeah.
not in homes or cities or towns or anything like that. So their whole life is about to change radically.
Yeah. I was also thinking a little bit this in relation to the if you're becoming or if you're studying Christianity today, a lot of work's been done. Like you're always talking about the study that the scholars have done. So there's a lot, but it's trying to relate this into my life.
Yep, you're building
There's
on.
a whole lot being done for me to
that's
just
brilliant.
walk into.
That's
you know?
brilliant.
Yeah.
You inherit the advances. Just we do in the scientific world. I mean, I've been watching some videos on the understanding of what is actual space, what is the
Yeah.
space between us and the galaxies kind of thing. And I've just been wrestling with that a little bit. And I'm realizing how Einstein built upon previous scientists who built upon previous scientists. And we're always inheriting the human story. We're part of the story, but we inherit what's gone before. And these guys are doing it. Like you say, we sit
Yeah.
here today, we're talking about stuff because we've inherited the scholars that have gone
Yeah.
before us.
And even views like I've been listening to this week's In Actual Time podcast about Revelation.
Yep.
And if you walked into the era that you and Jeff are talking about where it's all left behind,
Yes.
that's just the way it was. But now there's more research on it too.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. Now
prepare
you
you
can go,
in different ways.
oh, maybe there's a different way to read this.
Yeah.
Yes, that's right. And we're learning. Yeah, and that's I think that's a really good point, Kenny, that they were about to inherit something and they had to then use that wisely, steward what they inherited rather than just become proud about it. Yeah.
I've got read from 13 and talk about this in relation to our lives today.
Mm-hmm.
Ooh. You must fear the Lord your God and serve him when you take an oath. You must use only his name. You must not worship any of the gods of neighboring nations. For the Lord your God who lives among you is a jealous God. His anger will flare up against you and he will wipe you from the face of the earth. These things slap me in the face a bit.
Well, if they don't, there's something wrong. We should be letting them slap us
But
in the
yeah, I
face.
guess I was talking about the other things in your life that are easy to worship.
Yes.
Like money and,
Yep.
you know.
Well, I've said it enough times on this podcast. Pretty much everything that we worship that isn't God falls into sex, money, or power. The
Yeah.
big three, and you can pretty much put anything in that category in some form or another.
Yeah.
Yeah, and God's saying, don't serve any of those, because all of the other nations around, He's saying to these guys, That's how they worship. They
Yeah.
worship sex, money, and power.
That's
You know,
right.
Don't be like them.
And I guess when I'm reading this, that's what sort of struck me in the face. Like I was reading this and thinking, oh, those Israelites. And then I was like, God nudged me and said, hey, there's a few things in your life that
That's right.
that you look at. Me sitting in front of the fire going, oh, you're right.
And that's how we should interpret this. It was written for us, not to us, but there is stuff in here that we can learn that we need to hold. James says in the New Testament, the word is like a mirror that you hold up before your face. We should look at this and let it tell us something.
It's good. Massa. Where was Massa?
What verse are we in?
We're in 16 now. I've put here that the chapter finishes with some more reminiscing about the days of Egypt.
I think that might have been one of the first places they came to when they left Exodus, when they were hungry in the desert and they didn't have any water in the desert. There's a couple of whinging stories.
I think they made a few mistakes.
Yeah, they made a few mistakes. How come you let us come out here all the way into the desert to die and God would provide them water from the rock? Or I think that might be the Massa. And the word probably means bitterness or whinging or complaining. I think it might be whinging or complaining. So he's don't complain like you did back there in Massa.
Yeah.
Stop complaining.
You must not test the Lord your God as you did when you complained at Massa.
Yeah, so I think that's the story of Moses striking the rock because they were saying, where's the water? Are we going to thirst? And they put God to the test. Yes, so that's the story.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he's saying, don't be like that.
So he's just setting it up, saying you need to love the God, your God alone, and then you will enter and occupy the good land that the Lord's
trust him to provide for you what you need. Because what they didn't do at Massa is they didn't trust God, and God provided through Moses striking the rock, but they didn't trust him. They whinged and complained and said, we want this and we don't like that.
Yeah.
Which is it's the Eden narrative all over again.
Yeah.
The man and woman were supposed to trust God to provide what they needed that was good for life.
Yeah.
And they go, no, we're not going to trust you. So this whole story, Deuteronomy is now them. It's their Eden moment. In fact, you could see it this way. They are actually standing. Remember in the garden, in the story in Genesis.
Yeah.
Let's just set this up for the rest of the conversation. In the story in Genesis, the man and the woman are in the garden.
Yep.
They have been exiled out of the garden to the east.
Ooh.
Okay, they've been sent out of the garden and they went east. So the garden is in the west.
Yep.
They're being exiled east.
Yep.
And you got to infer this from the story, but there's rivers flowing out from the mountain, from Eden. These rivers flow out, right? Now, they are in the east.
Yep.
Eden, their promised land, is in the west, and there's a river in the way. So this is now their chance to go back inside the garden. That's the narrative that you're supposed to be reading. And so now, in order to go back into the garden, they're going to have to choose to do the opposite of what Eve and Adam did.
Wow.
They're going to have to choose to trust God, obey God, trust that he knows what's best for them. Story goes, of course.
Do they?
They don't. It's like, in fact, Moses is going to say that right at the end. He's going to go, you can choose for yourself life or death, but by the way, I know you're going to choose death, is what Moses says.
Wow.
I've been hanging out with you for long enough. I know how stubborn you are. You're going to choose death. But that's the narrative.
It's like a Disney movie.
And it repeats, And all the way through the Old Testament, we're waiting for the one who will choose life. And of course, that's Jesus. But I'm just setting that narrative. Think of it as this is their chance to go back into Eden. And this whole book is about them choosing to go back to Eden.
Love it. Thank you, Pastor Ron.
So it's just helpful, I think, is just to imagine it that way.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's about all I had for chapter 6.
All right.
So let's move on to chapter 7. Alrighty. Chapter 7, I'm in the NLT version and it has a heading, The Privilege of Holiness.
Yes, it does. I see that too.
Which is pretty cool. I said here, read verses 1 to 8. Read and comment.
Okay, go for it.
When the Lord your God brings you into the land you're about to enter and occupy, he will clear away many nations ahead of you. The Hittites, did I want to say these names? Girgashites, Amorites, Canaanites, Perizzites. No?
Yeah. So
Hivites and Jebusites. These 7
Marmites and Vegemites.
These 7 nations
The last 2 aren't there.
are greater and more numerous than you. When the Lord your God hands these nations over to you and you conquer them, you must completely destroy them.
Here we go.
Make no treaties with them and show them no mercy. You must not intermarry with them. Do not let your daughters and sons marry their sons and daughters, for they will lead your children away from me to worship other gods. Then the anger of the Lord will burn against you, and he will quickly destroy you. This is what you must do. You must break down their pagan altars and shatter their sacred pillars, cut down their Asherah poles and burn their idols. For you are a holy people who belong to the Lord your God. Of all the people on earth, the Lord your God has chosen you to be his own special treasure. I think maybe let's just leave it there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's just a bit of light reading, isn't it?
It makes sense when you read on after you hear the word destroy everything, because it gives a reason why you should destroy everything, which is harsh, but putting it into historical context, that is pretty much what they would have done.
Yep.
Any other country warring against the Israelites, if you took over a people, is that what would have happened?
Normally, the word destruction there is typical propaganda.
Okay.
It's not normally. Normally, in fact, even throughout history, we have a term for that, like ethnic cleansing, and it is one of the highest levels of abhorrence.
Yeah.
You know, whether that's ethnic cleansing as in killing everyone of a certain ethnicity, or a different form of ethnic cleansing, which Australia has been guilty of, through the stolen generation, is trying to what they would call ethnically remove a population group by interbreeding. But generally speaking, in ancient times, you didn't completely destroy it. They would use the language of completely destroy. But in fact, it's written in the text right there. It says, you just listen to this and tell me what you think.
So it says destroy them, but don't intermarry.
Don't intermarry. Well, if you've destroyed them, then how could you intermarry with them? How could you make treaties with them? So you can see this as a rhetoric that's very common. It's not just the Bible using that. All the ancient law codes that we found, Epic of Gilgamesh, lots of others that are around this time all say the same thing. So it's this rhetoric of destruction, but it's really more about this conquering, this defeating. You kind of say it, the Aussies absolutely destroyed the Kiwis today in cricket. That sort of thing.
Got it. All right.
But we kind of use it in that way. But we know they didn't actually physically take their bats and bash them over the head with them.
So was there a standard operating procedure to move into a town and
that's a really
take
good question.
It over?
Well, yes, there is, and in fact, some of the laws that we'll see in the in the Torah, and some of the ones we'll probably see in Deuteronomy actually have some guidelines around this, so that you don't completely obliterate. And this is where some of the differences between the Bible, the Torah, and some of the other ancient law codes, because it seems horrible and archaic to us, but God actually seems to put a boundary on how much vengeance you can reap. He actually lowers that boundary. The other nations kind of would be just saying, do whatever you want. But God goes, no. Care for the foreigner. Care for the widow. So he actually lowers that standard. He says this far and no further. Jesus.
So it's not angry God going, I am going to destroy
that's right.
every single little bone in their bodies.
Yes. And we do need to wrestle with that.
Yeah.
If we just read this, and this is obviously one of the main complaints, you and I think we talked about it when we were talking about Joshua last year, but it serves well to remember it again, because as an informed 21st century Christian, or just a generally person living in the West in the 21st century, you're going to be confronted by this passage. If you're not confronted or challenged by the fact that it seems to be saying God says go and destroy, then what planet are you living on?
Especially if he's giving the land to them.
Yes.
So he's obviously set it up so there's not going to be much fighting.
Yeah.
Or would they just be this place that they're going be so overwhelmed with the mass of Israelites that they were like, we're done for?
I think the narrative wants us to see it slightly differently. The narrative wants us to see that the Israelites coming in and doing this conquering are actually bringing about God's justice against the wickedness of the people living in that land.
Ooh, like it.
And the reason is that the language it's used here, the language is often used, it's flood language.
Yep.
So if we go all the way back to, and
Noah.
we actually go back to Noah, the flood is used, basically this is the narrative the Bible's picking up. Human wickedness has become so bad that if I let it run its course, they will completely destroy each other.
Yeah.
Therefore, God will speed up that natural process. He's basically saying, you've chosen, okay, I'm going to speed that process up. I'm going to bring a flood of judgment, which is of your own doing, really. It's not really me. It's your own doing. It's the human wicked heart going to the point where it builds empires and conquering and the rich oppressing the poor and sin rampant. I'm going to speed that process up, flood the earth, start again.
Yeah.
That's actually what's the same narrative here. So it actually likens it, because in Genesis chapter 5 and 6 with the story of Noah, it actually talks about the Nephilim, talks about the beasts, the giants that were on the land, the Nephilim. The scriptures are sort of making out whether it messes with their head or not. These are like satanically, these are half-breed beings that are half spirit beings, half natural beings. And all ancient religions have this. Greek mythology has it or whatever, right? But these people are wicked. These spirit human hybrids are seen. It says in Genesis 5, the Nephilim were on the earth in those days and afterwards.
Nice.
And so you're going to read here in these chapters about these Nephilim, these Anakim again, these other spirit hybrid beings. And the reason I'm taking so much time on this, because if we can do this, we can see the similarity between the flood narrative and what Joshua is going to do in the next book when he takes the promised land as like a flood of judgment. These people are so wicked. They are destroying themselves with their wickedness. God is going to wipe the land clean, bring in his people, and he's not completely obliterating, but those other people now will be, if it all goes well, those survivors will be living under a new law. Yeah. They'll live underneath God's people who should be treating them differently.
And to survive, they shouldn't intermarry and they should destroy all the other idols.
Yeah, so it's like, make sure that you don't let what's left affect you. Yeah. You affect them, don't let them affect you. That's why they were not to intermarry. They weren't to become like those people that were left behind. They were supposed to be bringing God, I guess they're supposed to be bringing God's values to these people that were left in the land.
Yep. I like it. I was just actually thinking, we went and saw the new Ghostbusters yesterday.
Did you?
And the big scary being was mentioned. There was a word from the Bible that he came from or something. One of the guy, the Iceman. I can't remember. I was watching.
He's one of the biblical
I
characters.
was terrified of him. He had horns and.
It takes me back. It takes me all the way back to whatever that's.
They said he came from some town in the Old Testament.
Okay, there you go.
I think so. Yeah. Anyway,
I just remember sitting in the movie theater, completely oblivious to the very first Ghostbusters movie. It's all tranquil, and then that librarian lady just launches at you with the screen. I actually screamed out loud at that point too, back in the 80s when I was a kid.
We watched number 1 last night.
Did you?
As well, Amanda fell asleep. Dear listeners. Okay, anyway, moving on. I've got verse 10. But he does not hesitate to punish and destroy those who reject him. I think I'm going straight on.
Yeah, this is kind of what we're talking about, is this whole idea of, but see it as God's punishment is really of your own making. Yeah. We humans bring a punishment on ourselves because we don't obey God.
Yes.
And that, dear listeners, as Kenny likes to say, that's actually worth just reflecting on, because therein, if you can meditate upon that, it actually gives you a valid reason to explain the existence of violence in the Bible.
Yeah.
Because one of the main questions often is, well, how's the Old Testament God who seems so vindictive compare with Jesus who seems so soft? And you have to wrestle with that. Why is there violence in the Bible? Yeah. Part of it is just that the cultures were so much more violent. That's part of it. But part of it too is this understanding that, no, this when this judgment is ordered, this is literally, it actually has an element of grace to it, because if we're left to our own devices, we'll just get worse and worse and worse.
Yeah. I had a similar judgment in my life. I don't know if I should say this. I was traveling in Australia and I was in the Gold Coast, and I was like partying a fair bit, probably living the wrong life.
Yep.
And the culmination was that this guy smashed my car, all the windows, all the headlights, and he said, "Get out of the Gold Coast or I'm going to kill you."
Really?
Yeah, it was pretty heavy, and it was a real kick in the butt. And I moved down. I drove to Brisbane with no windscreen in my car.
Wow.
And I moved into a backpackers, and I ended up dating the cleaner who was going to a youth group. And and it was a real slap in the face because I was living this high life after I'd lived in Melbourne, and all the way through my wilderness years, I was still touching base with God.
Yeah.
And this was like,
That was like,
you just can't.
that was your
live like
confronting
this.
moment.
Yeah.
And isn't it interesting that your life, whatever you were doing in that moment, brought you to a point where you came under the judgment of someone else who had done the wrong thing too.
Yeah.
But was it his fault or was it your fault? You'd have to argue, well, it was both of you. It was a good example of what happens when humans try to do things our own way, wouldn't it?
Well, the story goes on. About a year after that, I was at a music festival and I saw the guy that smashed my car, and he was obviously out of it.
Right.
And I was in the position where I could walk up behind him, and if I wanted to king hit him, and I had this moment of temptation
to do
and
that.
I just looked at this guy and I just turned around and walked away and said, I'm not going to do that.
So that is, well, like it says here, you've technically that's obeying the commands and decrees. You had a choice for vengeance, but you didn't take it.
Yeah.
And you can see how that the choosing to vengeance would have just perpetuated the thing further.
Yeah.
But choosing life, choosing to obey God's commands and taking a higher moral standard actually brings life.
Yeah.
We talked about living a long life.
That's it.
There's an example of, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you might not be here today if you had a king hit that guy.
I know.
mean, you just don't know. But I mean, that's how we're talking about this not being an absolute.
Yeah.
But you can see the principle at work. If I choose to love my neighbor, it's much more likely I'm going to have a better life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Still stayed out in the wilderness for many more years.
Took years. Yeah, that's right. But the principle is still there. Yep.
Verses 12 to 15. If you listen to these regulations and faithfully obey them, the Lord your God will keep his covenant. How am I saying? Am I saying covenant?
Covenant.
Right?
That's how I say it. Yep.
Sorry, Amanda. Of
I think some
unfailing
people say
love
covenant,
with
but I
you,
say covenant.
as he promised with an oath to your ancestors. He will love you and bless you, and he will give you many children. He will give fertility to your land and your animals when you arrive in the land he swore to give your ancestors. You will have large harvests of grain, new wine and olive oil, and great herds of cattle, sheep, and goats. You will be blessed above all the nations of the earth. None of your men or women will be childless, and all your livestock will bear young. And the Lord will protect you from all sickness. He will not let you suffer from the terrible diseases you knew in Egypt, but he will inflict them on all your enemies. That's a big, broad one, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a broad-ranging scope of blessing. It's really not that different to long life, that blessing. And this blessing and cursing thing comes up here. It comes up again at the end of the book of Deuteronomy.
Yeah.
I think Jesus has got this on his mind when he starts the Beatitudes.
Yep.
Blessed are those who are persecuted. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. I think there's this blessing. It's the same principle, is that as a general rule, if you honor God, you'll come under blessing.
Yeah. I was also going to ask, this land of milk of honey that they're moving into, is this where the war is right now?
Yes, to a degree. That most of the war is happening in the south, which is the desert region.
Yep.
Gaza is down south in the desert region, which is a little bit different to this. It's only it's pretty close. Like,
see, I'm not cluey at all, but
No.
I've written about this comment without understanding about the war. That means that I'm not understanding right now. Is it the Israelites that are getting hammered? Is it because they didn't obey?
Okay, yeah, you're getting into a pretty deep philosophical question, and there'll be people who argue all kinds of that argument. Listeners, go back and listen to my conversation with Phil Weirden about it, which was that was
a separate podcast, wasn't it?
We did a separate podcast on that, which is on the Israel-Gaza war, but that's February. Like, we're probably due to do a new one soon. But we touched on some of these issues here. I don't want to liken Israel, modern Israel, to this Old Testament Israel. I think that's one of the mistakes we Christians make. We try and make out that secular Israel in the 21st century is the same group of people. They would like to think they are.
Yeah.
And ethnically, there are definitely connections there, Jewish people. However, I think in most of the New Testament, we're supposed to see God's church, his new chosen people, as applied. We apply these principles of Israel to our life.
Yeah.
But it is the same geographical land.
Yeah. It
Whether
just popped into my head.
Whether or not this is because they haven't obeyed it, certainly in the Old Testament. So when they go into exile to Babylon, you're definitely supposed to see that the reason they were carried into exile into Babylon in 586 BC was because they didn't obey these laws.
Yeah.
It was a breach of their covenant with God, and the end result of that is they were carried into exile. To then go and say that's what's happening today, I think that's probably beyond the scope of what Scripture's predicting.
Okay.
Other than just to say, hey, if you're going to treat people badly, you're going to get treated badly.
Yeah.
That's going to come back on you. And that would go for both sides, the Jews and the Arabs.
Yeah, yeah.
Because they've both treated, pockets of them have treated each other terribly.
I just thought I'd throw it in there because it's always been about this little pocket of land.
It still is.
It? Yeah.
It's deeply contested pocket of land. Yep, that's right.
I was reading a surfing magazine and the surfer travelled recently around Jerusalem and he said that it's in like ruins. Is that correct?
Well, no, not really.
Not ruins.
No, I wouldn't say. I mean, there are ruins ancient ruins, but that's because they've dug them up.
No, there's no fighting in Jerusalem at the moment.
Yeah, no, there's not really any fighting in Jerusalem. Not the city of Jerusalem.
Maybe I got it wrong.
Yeah. Well, there were 200 missiles launched from Iran just the other week, but none of them reached Jerusalem.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, I've got written here, were the Israelites the only people that believed in God at this time, like the God that we believe in?
That's a really good question. I think the narrative would want you to assume yes.
Yeah.
That they are the only ones who serve. They are Abraham's descendants, and Yahweh revealed himself to Abraham and then to Abraham's descendants.
Yeah.
Whether or not there would be others in other nations that maybe had a revelation of God, I'd have to think that's possible.
Yeah.
You know, they were just a blacklist.
I was just thinking, what the group of Israelites, are they the only ones traveling through the wilderness?
Well, the narrative is supposed to indicate that they see themselves as the only ones, and God's saying, you are the ones I've chosen.
Yep.
And now I want you to go and represent me and fill the earth with my ways. That's how the narrative is supposed to be read. I don't think to then go and go, every person who's a Canaanite or every person who's living in the jungles of Africa at this point in time doesn't know God. I think I think that's beyond the scope of the Scripture.
Okay.
But the narrative is, you're my people, live for me, and show others what I'm like. That's how we're supposed to.
Good answer. What else did I write here? Were the people that he was handing over to them really evil?
Oh, that's the same thing. Yes. So,
yeah, there's what we were talking about.
No, I think you have to say yes, they were. I mean, they were living abhorrent lives. They were sacrificing, infants. They were, assaulting people for the name of their religion. They were doing all kinds of horrible, horrific things that God will refer to, and that's part of it. But that doesn't mean that every person was evil. I think it'd be better to go, the system was broken. There were abusive people abusing power that were oppressing their own people, let alone the Israelites. So there were victims even within that land. And maybe, here's a thought.
Much like present day.
So maybe the judgment, people are going to get swept up. So these other nations are going to get swept up in the judgment, right?
Yep.
Of the Israelites coming in and taking over. But it's probably predominantly the judgment is going to be leveled at those in authority.
Yeah.
If you want to win a war, you win a war by taking out the head of the monster.
Yeah.
So you'd kill the king.
Yeah.
So if you think about it that way, when they came in, their goals would have been to obliterate the kings and those in authority. Often the commoners out in the farms, they get drafted into the war.
Yeah.
But they're not totally going to go around, even in that day, they're not going to go around and necessarily obliterate every person. That's not how God wanted them to be. He wanted them to be different to that. He wanted them to just take out the enemy, break the system so that God's way of living can come in.
Got it. I like it. Even though it does say in 16, you must destroy all the nations the Lord your God hands over to you. Show them no mercy and do not worship their gods.
Yes. So I think you can see it as rhetoric. You can destroy a nation without destroying all the people. If you destroy the nation and its systems and bring down the kings and those in authority and those in the priests who are trying to abuse people, you bring that down, you have destroyed a nation without destroying every person in the nation.
I get it. I like it. I guess, so I've commented, so when I'm reading this, how can I sow this into the thread of Jesus and God's plan when eventually all Gentiles can come to know God?
Yeah, that's a good question.
So it's all about this one people, but in God's big plan, it's everybody.
Yep. And this is where the Jews went wrong. They started to think it was all about them. But the narrative of the Bible is God's choosing you, and now you're back to doing what Adam and Eve were supposed to do: fill the earth and subdue the earth, bring my kingdom to the earth. They thought, oh no, we're the important ones. We can rule over you. We can subdue you, but subdue there doesn't mean like have you under my thumb. Subdue means bring the kingdom into their lives. So if you see it that way, their goal, in fact, Moses will call them a kingdom of priests. In other words, they are supposed to be representing him in a way that all the other Gentile nations actually look at this kingdom, look at this people of Israel, look at the laws they live by, and it said you'll see this multiple times in the Torah. When they look at you, they will go, I want what you've got. You treat your people better than we do. You have a higher moral standard. It's supposed to be attractive compared to what they've got around them. That's how it was supposed to be. But instead, they started to go, no, we're the elite ones. And they abused their power. And then in the process of abusing their power, they just became just like the nations that they had run out of town.
Which is the same as Adam and Eve.
Which is the same as what Adam and Eve did. Which is the same. That's that repeating narrative.
Yeah.
Yep, throughout the Bible.
Wow. That's great. That's about all I had for chapter 7.
Chapter 7, we're going to chapter 8.
Okie dokie. Chapter 8. Good old Deuteronomy. How you going out there, listeners?
I was just saying to Kenny off air, this is really, you wouldn't think this is very good in Deuteronomy, that it's not interesting, but it's so rich and practical for our lives.
And it just shows that something that I may have skipped over in the past.
Is
if you have a little
worth meditating
bit
on.
more of a dig.
Yep.
Very cool. And it really did all this really did spark me to remember my walk with God. And I mean, I guess every Christian at some time has felt like they're in the wilderness.
Yeah. Yep,
you know,
we do.
And I now know that God was always with me and he was always wishing for me to obey his commands. And there was always a level where if I would have walked a certain way, but I
you
walked
didn't
a different way,
and
he was still there.
And he's still graciously calling out. Yes, that's right.
Because he had, I guess he's chosen everyone, but he had chosen me, I realise now, back then, but it was up to me to walk and obey the right commands.
Yep, that's right.
Did I put that right?
Yep, I think that's exactly it. That's how you're supposed to view it. Yep.
Yeah. So the title of chapter 8 in the NLT version is A Call to Remember and Obey.
Is that word remember and obey? I reckon that one of those words will be Shema, I reckon.
Yeah. In this chapter, Moses goes over yet again the history of the Israelites, which he does quite a bit in this book because he's talking to the new generation.
Yes,
and he just keeps reminding them.
Yep. It's actually a little note for preachers out there. Take the way Moses repeats himself multiple times and take that on board when you're writing a sermon.
Yeah.
Because we as preachers, we think, oh no, I've said it once, that's enough. Moses tells us, no.
I wrote in here, so it must be important.
It must be important. Well, I think it's important, and I think we just, as preachers, we need to keep repeating ourselves over and over and over and over, because that's when it just starts to settle in.
Yeah.
Yep.
I wanted to ask about manna. He does talk about the manna that they survived on. Did manna exist before this manna started falling from the sky? Do the scholars know that?
The scholars don't know.
Is manna something that, fell in many regions?
No, I think there's nothing that I'm aware of where scholars would be able to say there's anything that resembles what manna was.
And does manna exist today?
No, there's nothing, as far as we know, there's nothing that has ever been like what manna is.
Wow.
In fact, they call
Does anyone have an explanation for it?
Well, the only explanation is a spiritual explanation, and that is, and has always been that. The Jews have always believed it was literally bread from heaven. They literally believed this is something supernatural. This wasn't like, and there's other stories where God will feed them with quail. Yeah. He'll cause a wind to blow up and bring the quail across. I mean, that's natural quail, and that's just basically a weather pattern which feeds them, right? This is different. In fact, the manna is called manna because it means what is it? They looked at it and go, I've never seen this before. What is this? We haven't seen this in Egypt. No one knows what this is. And I think your narrative is supposed to see that this is purely supernatural provision.
Beautiful.
Hence, they needed it when they're in the desert. And the moment they crossed the Jordan River in the book of Joshua, it says the manna stopped and they never saw it again. So the narrative is this is supernatural provision of food.
Love it. That's very cool. How could verse 4, How could their clothes not wear out in 40 years?
Same thing. Supernatural provision. And I think it's
That really is supernatural.
It is. And their shoes
my
didn't wear out.
stepdaughters couldn't go through a pair of shoes in
exactly
a month.
I think of my son Mike out there who, in his skateboarding. Did you have the skateboarding thing where you're doing kick flips all the time?
Yeah.
It's just the one part of the shoe always wore out. We had tape on it and everything. These guys lasted 40 years. And I think that's the point. He's actually, in these early verses of Deuteronomy 8, he's reminding them of God's supernatural provision. He fed you. He clothed you. All the things. I wonder if Jesus is picking up on this in chapter 6 of Matthew, where he says, don't worry about what you'll eat. What your heavenly Father knows that you need those things.
Ooh.
I wonder if he's got this in mind.
I like it.
I know in John's gospel, which is we're going to record, you and I are going to record a John's gospel soon. Jesus calls himself the bread from heaven. He says, I'm actually the real bread. It wasn't Moses that's the real bread from heaven. I'm the real bread who came down from heaven.
There's a statement.
That's going to be in our chapter. We're doing John 7 to 11 when I get back from holidays. And I think it's John chapter 8. He says, I am the true bread who came down from heaven. So remember that when we record it, Kenny.
Okay, I'll try.
It's this story. So this is just Moses' way of saying, remember that God protected you, provided for you, sheltered you, fed you, clothed you.
And as it says in verse 5, disciplines.
And disciplines.
Think about it. Just as a parent disciplines a child, the Lord your God disciplines you for your own good. Like my little story about the Gold Coast and stuff.
Exactly, yep.
Yeah. It's fantastic. Verses 6 to 10, he's talking about how good the promised land is.
Yeah, he's going to draw a narrative. He's just spent a few verses telling them, remember when you've been in the desert that I provided you with everything you need.
Yeah.
Now, when you cross into the land, you're not going to need one set of clothes for the rest of your life. You're going to be able to get shoes. You're going to be able to get food. You're going to be able to get a roof over your head. You're going to have all these things provided for you, but I need you to remember that it's still me providing. I'm just providing in a different way. And he's going to challenge them on it.
Like it.
Because he's going to say, when you get there, you're going to have a temptation, which is our problem in the West. You're going to have this temptation to think, oh, I did this.
Yeah.
I won that battle. I got this food. I worked for it. And he says in Deuteronomy, I might be jumping ahead of your notes. I think it's chapter 8, verse 6, is it? It is he.
Talking about how good the promised land is. This a metaphor for our lives on this earth?
Okay,
the promised land is heaven.
Yes. Now, it is here. So it says, remember that it is the Lord who gives you the power to get wealth. Is a catchphrase out of here. Remember that everything we have comes from the Lord. So is this, read it again, read your question. Is it a catchphrase?
Oh, no, I put verses 6 to 10. He is talking about how good the promised land is. Is this a metaphor for our lives on this earth and the promised land is heaven if we obey and commands?
Yes. Yes. More. Yes. I think the promised land is not, Christians have made the promised land about heaven.
Yeah.
I actually think the promised land metaphor is about how we can live as a Christian in this life.
Yeah.
Not something we're just waiting for, but that if we can truly trust God and remember him, he will provide richly for us in this life.
Yep.
Okay. And that does not mean we're not talking about
He hasn't provided me
doctrine.
wealth yet.
Exactly. You've got to then take it and realize this, and this is where the prosperity gospel has gotten wrong. They've taken it and gone, okay, that means I can have the house I want and the car I want and all that. That's not what God's saying. Jesus makes that really clear. But there is a prosperity of life, a health of life, a peace in life, a happiness in life that we can have.
This is what I tell my mates from Perth who have done quite well off the housing boom and stuff. I say, I haven't got money, but I'm happy.
That's right.
I'm at peace.
Well, even some of the more modern translations, when they translate the word blessed in the Beatitudes in Matthew 5, they say, happy are you when. And it's actually not that bad a translation. It's the word blessed it's used in the Greek in there. It really refers to a contentment of life, a fullness of life.
Yeah.
And you can have a fullness of life without having stuff.
Yeah.
In fact, he's going to tell you, because this is what's going to happen. These guys are going to go in and they're going to measure their fulfillment by the stuff they have.
Yeah.
And God's going to say, you missed it because you've forgotten me in the process of you're now chasing the stuff rather than me.
That's
and
good.
God's going to call them on that. Jeremiah is my Bible reading today. Jeremiah chapter 2. He says, my people have done two wicked things. He says, firstly, they have forsaken me, the well of eternal life, and they have dug for themselves cracked cisterns which cannot hold water. Anytime we chase stuff, It's like digging a hole, a cistern in the ground that's cracked, and eventually the water's going to leak out. It might hold water for a while. It might make us happy or feel blessed for a while, but eventually the water will leak out. Anytime we chase stuff.
I like it.
Or chase food. Jesus says, don't worry about what you'll eat or what you'll drink, right? But if we truly chase God, as Moses is calling these Israelites to do, to remember God, obey him, remember that he's the one who gives them provision.
Yep.
Chase him, seek. I'm mixing Moses and Jesus here. Jesus says, seek first the kingdom.
Yep.
And all this stuff will be added to you. When we put him first, he is a well of spring living water. Wells don't run out.
Yep.
Like spring of living water. They do not run out. They just keep
because they're
bubbling
continuously
fed from below. And that's the difference. You can have a choice of a cracked system which looks good for a while, or you can chase God and continually be fed. And whether you have food on your table, those early first century martyrs, they were being burned at the stake by Emperor Nero, and they were full. They were prosperous. They were blessed in that process because they had their eye on a greater goal.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is very cool. Verses 11 to 18. I've got here. Let's jump to 11. I wanted to say about the land of milk and honey because recently we've been blessed with a new rental house, and the land that it's on, I am just so happy.
It's beautiful, isn't it?
It's not anything amazing, but it just backs onto some bushland, and this whole moving to this place, which at the start was like you got to get out of your rental, freaked us out. But I've arrived in this place and I feel like God's blessed me because it's helped me to realise that I don't really need much. To wake up in the morning and see gum trees and kookaburras and lorikeets and have a fire at night. This is the things that are really
so good,
feeding
Kenny.
my soul at the moment.
That's so good. I love that. Yeah.
I feel very blessed.
Well, that's a really good example of what we're talking about here, because these verses here are pretty much what I've just said about, when you get there, don't forget the Lord your God.
Yeah.
But you've done that. You've gone, okay, I could have seen this as, we had to move out of our house, but we've seen that this is God blessing you, even though you haven't got another house. You haven't got a house of your own, but God's still bringing you some blessing. Yeah.
It's like a change in my situation, and it's gone through to my heart.
Great.
So I've been a lot happier and more at peace.
And then we intuitively know it, just because people can have the best of everything and still not have peace.
That's right.
Peace is not related to stuff.
And really, I'm living at the back of Albion Park, and
it's the middle
of
nowhere.
Nothing special.
No, that's right. But peace is not related to having stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, verses 11 to 18. Shall I read some of it? But that is the time to be careful. Beware that in your plenty you do not forget the Lord
Let's
your
just read
God.
it and let Moses speak to it like he's speaking to us today.
Yeah. Beware that in your plenty you do not forget the Lord your God and disobey his commands, regulations and decrees that I am giving you today. For when you have become full and prosperous and have built fine homes to live in, and when your flocks and herds have become very large and your silver and gold have multiplied along with everything else, be careful. Do not become proud at that time and forget the Lord your God who rescued you from slavery in the land of Egypt. Do not forget that he led you through the great and terrifying wilderness with its poisonous snakes and scorpions. Where it was so hot and dry, he gave you water from the rock. He fed you with manna in the wilderness, a food unknown to our ancestors. He did this to humble you and test you for your own good. He did all this so you would never say to yourself, I have achieved this wealth with my own strength and energy. Remember the Lord your God. He is the one who gives you power to be successful in order to fulfill the covenant he confirmed to your ancestors with an oath.
And it's that verse 18 that is translated in other versions. Remember the Lord, he's the one who gives you the power to get wealth. Yeah.
I've written, how easy is it to forget the Lord when things are going really well?
Totally.
Or to relax and not obey his commands.
It's a lot harder to stay focused on the Lord on the top of the mountain than it is in the foot of the valley, because you've got no one else to cling to. Yep. And that's Israel's narrative. That's our narrative. You don't have to be experienced in your faith to read that and go, I think God's trying to tell me something about where my trust is. Do you?
And how quickly we can become proud and when things go right.
Yeah, exactly. You're right, Kenny. So now reflect back that and now put that back onto what we read in the previous chapters about writing the law on your hand and on your forehead and tapping it on the door and all that
So
sort of
don't
stuff.
forget.
Don't forget. Don't forget. Just
Yeah.
well, actually, it's remember, 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 remember. That word, remember, comes up 90 times or something in the book of Deuteronomy. Remember, remember. Because we have this propensity to forget.
Yes.
Yep.
I've written that this chapter closes out with a warning about forgetting and following other gods. And there's another reference to destroy, but we've already talked about that.
Good.
Good chapter.
Yeah, great. We've got 2 to go now.
Jeez, we're flying through it. Jeannie, look out.
Sorry, Jeannie. I didn't say anything about you taking longer.
Tell me that music doesn't get stuck in your head sometimes.
Always does.
I can whistle it now. Chapter 9, Deuteronomy. The heading in my NLT is Victory by God's Grace. When Moses says today in verse 1, he doesn't actually mean that day, does he? So when he's giving this sermon,
he says,
it's not
today
the
you're about
actual
to cross the
day.
Jordan River.
Yeah.
Well, I guess you could say today you are about to,
Yeah.
not you are about to today. You're getting close. It's a matter of days or weeks or months, but it's close, yes.
Yeah, and this was a series of sermons, wasn't it?
Yes.
Or talks. This wouldn't have been, so he would have,
It's written like it's one,
yeah.
but whether or not Moses held them all out, read the whole thing and preached the whole sermon in one go or not, but that's how it's written.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Verse 2, we mentioned the Anakite giants.
Yes,
Is that
here
what
we
you
go.
were saying
Yes, the
about
Anakites.
the
These are the
fallen,
Nephilim, the fallen
the
ones. Yep.
Nephilim? Yeah. Wasn't you know how, was it Joshua who sent people ahead of the land and they went over to the next land and saw the giant? Were they the same giants?
Same ones.
Okay.
Yep. That's where Joshua and Caleb and the 10 other spies went in. This is where they saw the Anakites. Yep. They're still there. That's correct.
Still there.
Yep.
Is there any evidence that those people existed in non-believers?
Yeah, there is a bit of archaeological evidence.
Andre the Giant?
Andre the Giant. Well, there is in somewhere in modern day Jordan in a museum somewhere, I think, there is evidence. Oh, you're stretching me, Kenny. There's an iron bed they've found an iron frame of a bed, which is like 12 foot long or something.
Wow.
Now, it could just be that it was just a long bed.
Yeah.
But there's evidence like that seems to indicate that there were possibly some of these people. And there are other probably archaeological evidence that's out there that sort of indicated it. I'm inclined to trust that it's the case. The reason I'm inclined to trust that this whole accuracy about these giants is because they are in every culture.
Yeah.
Every single culture on the planet that I know of has reference to these spiritual human hybrids. So something's going on. It's not just something that's written in the Bible. It's written in every culture.
The last Noah movie, when they were like rock people.
Yep, they were rock people.
I don't know about.
Yeah, no, I don't know about the rock
people.
No, the narrative of the Bible is that they are. It says in men of renown. It says they became the kings and the rulers and the authorities, and they were big and they were violent, and they were the Bible's narrative is that they were evil.
Right.
A lot of the other ancient cultures revered them, like Hercules, the Greek god Hercules, who's a half man, half god. They revered him as some kind of hero. So in the Greeks, they call them heroes in Greek mythology, and they are venerated as the best of humanity. What's the Disney show that was just on? It's all about this. It was they made a movie out of it years ago, and they've just turned it back into a.
So Hercules was real.
Well, no, his story is a. What I'm saying is whether or not he's a real person or not. That whole concept of a half-breed person.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm thinking of Percy Jackson.
Percy
Jackson and the lightning thing. Well, Disney have just produced a whole new television series about Percy Jackson, which is all these human spiritual half-breeds going to live in a camp to be protected from the world around them. So this is in every culture.
Yep.
And that's what we're seeing here is this belief that there are these Anakites, these Nephilim, these half-breed spirit beings.
Nice.
And it messes with our head, don't get
Yeah.
me wrong. But nonetheless, I would stop short of saying it's just a story. I think personally, I think that there's enough evidence that I'm prepared to admit that there were evil spiritual beings that found a way to procreate with humans, and they were punished for it
Wow.
severely. Like Peter in his gospel talks about it and says they were the ones that did that were banished to the deepest, darkest
Wow.
place, waiting for judgment from Christ.
Okay.
So yeah, it was not something that God was down with
Yep.
at all.
Wow. Okay, verses 3 to 7, very humbling for the Israelites as they get told off by God.
Yes, yes. It's like I'm looking at that. You're right.
So I guess Moses is, but recognize today that the Lord your God is the one who will cross over ahead of you like a devouring fire to destroy them. He will subdue them so that you quickly conquer them and drive them out, just as the Lord promised. After your Lord your God has done this for you, don't say in your hearts, the Lord has given us this land because we are such good people, which is what you were talking about before. Yep. No, it's because of the wickedness of the other nations that he is pushing them out of your way.
I think we've pretty much covered all that, haven't we?
That's good.
Remember that this is God bringing judgment on them. It's not because you're so special.
Yeah.
Yep.
Making it clear. So then I've got verses 8 to 17, a recap of when they made the golden calf.
Yep.
I've misspelt it and put Holden calf.
The Holden calf.
I saw some nice Holdens at the Anzac Day march yesterday.
Did you?
A recap of when they made the golden calf while Moses was up Mount Sinai.
Sinai.
I
think you could say Sinai actually. But
and so this is when I've gone into a bit of so Moses fasted 40 days and 40 nights on Mount Sinai, then 40 days and 40 nights, so God didn't destroy everyone after he got down.
Yep.
Let's talk about a human's capacity to do that.
Okay. Well, I think, and it says Jesus fasted for 40 days and 40 nights. So It says he ate and drank nothing. Well, unless a human being is supernaturally sustained, a human being cannot last 40 days without water. But plenty of human beings can last 40 days. You and I would probably last 40 days. Well, maybe not you. I might last 40 days because I've got better fat stores than you do. But no, humans can last 40 days without food. I've known people who've done 40-day fasts, full 40-day fast where they've just done water. I've known a few over the years. They look pretty thin at the end of it, but you can do it. But you can't last 40 days without water. So I think
Moses doing that back to back was supernatural.
Well, there is a gap. Yeah, it's implied. I think you're supposed to see that there was a supernatural provision on the mountain for Moses. When Jesus fasted for 40 days and 40 nights in the desert, in the southern
before he got tempted by the devil.
Yes, that's right. It's possible that he was drinking dew on leaves off things like that. There wouldn't have been many leaves around, but there would have been a few. So it's possible he was drinking dew. I'm inclined to think that he probably did. I think the problem with Jesus fasting for 40 days and not drinking anything is that the whole purpose of that temptation is supposed to be that he's doing it as a full human being.
Yeah.
So therefore, if he was somehow supernaturally protected from drinking, then he's not really going through a full testing as a human being. Does that make sense? He'd have to be tested like us. Therefore, he'd have to survive on the water that he could get from dew and any little creek that he'd come across, etc.
So was Moses doing it to be more spiritual, to be higher in his...
That's essentially what fasting does. Yeah, fasting...
I've never quite got there.
Fasting,
I've fasted.
It takes time. But fasting
just
does
been
align
angry.
ourselves with God's will. And I don't get angry when I fast, but I know people who do, But yes, fasting is supposed to suppress the human appetites, and that then kind of tunes us in. But it takes a while to get to that point where you feel tuned into God.
Yeah.
But that's what Moses was doing,
I mean, poor Moses fasted for 40 days, came down the mountain and found the gold calf.
And then had to go back.
Jeez.
Go back up and do another 40-day fast. Yes.
Yeah. Or didn't he stay down and do 40 days
I think he did.
And then went back up to get the stones?
Yeah, I think that's how it works. Yeah, I think that's the narrative. Yeah, exactly.
Verse 22. I've jumped quite ahead there.
Mm-hmm.
But what happened? So it goes on to talk about what happened at Taberah, Massah,
Kibroth, Hattaavah,
Kadesh Barnea.
Basically all the places where you're stuffed up in the desert.
Yeah, so were they battles when Israel didn't listen to the instructions of the Lord?
We've already talked about Massah. I'm not sure. I don't think so. I think it's more that they
complained.
That was where they complained. They didn't trust God, and the end result was that there were plagues and things that came upon them, or fire came upon them at one point, like a bushfire or something. So I think the narrative is not so much that they were attacked by enemies, but that their whinging and complaining brought about their own demise. I think that's how it works. They whinged their way to a bushfire. I mean, it doesn't make sense naturally, but that's what they're trying to say. Yeah.
Yeah. Their attitudes got so
dinky.
crap.
Yeah, exactly.
God's pulled them up.
Yeah. And the end result was, their attitude got so, if you think about it, and they're in the desert and there are bushes around and all kinds of stuff, they're under God's protection. It's like their whinging was so much against God that God just withdrew his hand of protection.
Yep.
And the end result of the withdrawal of God's hand of protection was that they were open to the elements and diseases and all that sort of stuff. So it's like the natural byproduct of turning your back on God is that you're going to be exposed to the worst of what the life has to offer us. But if we stay close to God, he will protect us from the worst of what life has to offer us. Very good.
So I'm just scrolling through this chapter and realizing that Moses goes all through the golden calf and how he threw the stone tablets on the ground and threw himself down before the Lord for 40 days and nights. He says he didn't drink water, but
and
really
I think he probably, in his case, I'd say the narrative is that he didn't drink water. But whether or not he had sips of water from dew, I don't know. But if he didn't, he was
doing
supernaturally
this
provided.
Because of the great sin they committed to try and save God from destroying them.
Yes. Yep.
Which could be not actually destroying them, but bringing forces of nature and stuff.
Exactly.
On them.
Yep. Yeah. That's right. Yep. The end result of it, that God would withdraw from them. And he didn't want God to withdraw from them. Yeah. You see these early chapters setting up. We're about to get into a whole lot of laws in chapter 12 onwards, but he's setting up all this reminder all the way through.
Yeah. And around 27 he says, please overlook the stubbornness and the awful sin of these people and remember instead your servants Abraham, Isaac and Jacob. If you destroy these people, the Egyptians will say, the Israelites died because the Lord wasn't able to bring them to the land he had promised to give them. Or they might say, he destroyed them because he hated them. He deliberately took them into the wilderness to slaughter them. But they are your people and your special possession, whom you brought out of Egypt by your great strength and powerful arm.
So what we see here is a type of intercession. This is one man standing in the gap, willing to give up his life. He does it in Exodus and he does it here, willing to give up his life for the sake of other people.
Yep.
He's saying, he says in Exodus, if you're not going to choose them, don't choose me. Kill me now. Like he stands there ready to die.
So he's the martyr. He could be the martyr for the people.
He's the intercessor. He's the type of Jesus who stands in the gap for us. Okay, so that's what intercession is. Intercession, whether it's in prayer or in service, is actually giving up something of ourselves, being prepared to lay down our lives for others. That's what Moses is doing here. That's what you do every time you come to church and you serve. That's what
really
you do when you give up something. It's a kingdom principle.
Yep.
We lay down our lives for others.
I like it.
All right, well, we've
really
got
cool.
one to go, haven't we?
One to go. Oh, look, can we just finish by talking about powerful arm? It says in these powerful arm, and that's just God's.
Yep. Well, right arm.
Right hand was the
sword hand.
Sword hand.
Yep, that's right.
God's powerful arm.
God's powerful arm. It's a picture of strength. The right arm became a sign of strength. He will protect us by his strength.
Fantastic. All right, awesome. One chapter left.
One to go. Well done, Candy.
Thank you. Okie dokie. Chapter 10 and the final chapter of this podcast.
Yes, Kenny, in record time.
Have I record?
Definitely record
I don't know if
time.
that's a good thing, but it's okay.
It's a good thing for me. I'm really busy at the moment. And you are too. Yeah, it's good.
The first thing I wrote down, the title is A New Copy of the Covenant. And the first thing I wrote down was that I didn't remember that there was 2 stone tablets.
Ah, yes, okay.
I mean, what was Moses thinking, smashing the first ones on the ground after 40 days?
Moses had anger issues,
He must have been really angry.
Yeah. And look, and I think you're supposed to see that. Moses had anger issues.
Yeah.
I mean, what got him in the mess? Why did he run into the desert in the first place? because he killed an
Killed
Egyptian.
that guy. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, he had major anger issues.
He had a pretty tough life, really.
Yeah.
There was the time when he just was spending all day listening to people's problems.
Yep.
Before he...
Yep, he had it tough. But yes, Moses got frustrated when he saw how they behaved, and he smashed those stone tablets on the ground, and then he had to go up and get 2 more. So he had to bear the consequences of his own failings there as much as the people.
He had helpers, yeah. He would have had a couple of Sherpas with him.
Yeah. Joshua was the one who went with him occasionally, but Joshua didn't go all the way to the mountain either. Joshua went to a certain point and stopped. Generally, Joshua is his offsider, but generally Moses is portrayed as doing a lot of this on his own.
Have you been to Mount Sinai?
No, I haven't been there. No, and I'm not even sure if the traditional site is the correct site. But
okay,
yeah, I haven't been into the Sinai Peninsula. It's not a recommended place to go at the moment. It's not even aside from the current Israel-Gaza war. It was never really for the last probably decade or so. It's not generally recommended to go into the Sinai Peninsula because there's been a few terrorist attacks and things there.
Okay, is this the first wooden ark that was made, and is this the only wooden ark to house the tablets?
Yes.
So there's only ever been one.
The other wooden ark was much bigger and held animals.
Oh.
This is the first wooden ark of this size. Yes, that's right.
Is this the same wooden ark off Raiders of the Lost Ark?
Yes.
Okay.
Same one. It's the same one. That's what they're referring to.
What else have I written here? Is this Moses still looking back on what happened? Yes, it is.
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah, he's reminding them again, referring back.
Then I've written verse 10, another 40 days and nights. Moses must have been really skinny. This might have been towards the end of my notes.
He started to thin out your notes now. Get it?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, he must have been. There's a lot of 40 days and 40 nights fasting going on here.
Yeah. Well, this chapter sort of rounds off a bit of what he's been going through, doesn't it?
Yes. Yeah, he's basically
it's like the rounding. He's finishing off
telling
his
about his
sermon.
experiences. Yep.
Yeah. We're at verse 10. I found some good stuff at verse 10.
Mm-hmm.
Just want to get to it so I can read it at the same time. Well, he's still talking about himself, but in my notes I've put walk in obedience to him. The word walk in Deuteronomy 10:12 speaks of how we live and behave.
Ah, yes.
The phrase walk in obedience to him carries the idea of walking in all his ways and living in a way that pleases him.
Okay, I think where you wanted to go was 10:12, not 10:10.
Oh, 10:12.
Yeah, 10:12, which is a new subtitle, a call to love and obedience.
That's it.
And now, Israel, what does the Lord God require of you? He requires only that you fear the Lord your God and live in a way that pleases him and love him and serve him with all your heart and soul. And you must always obey the Lord's commands and decrees that I'm giving you today for your own good. That's walking in his language, yes. So
which sometimes is no easy feat for us.
No, because we have these constant temptations to wander off.
Yes. And even with certain things, like I've been practicing speaking kindly to my stepdaughters instead of whinging at them.
Yep.
And I'm getting results.
Great.
But it's so easy if they're doing the same things over and over again for me
to default back.
Yes, to default back, and that's what I really want to do.
Yes.
But when I concentrate and give words of affirmation for the things they do right, which is obeying God's.
It actually sounds a lot like this, isn't it? And it's bringing his kingdom values of peace into the home. That's exactly what, this stuff is relevant to us right now because of this reason.
Yeah. And I've actually been trying things like that in my life a bit more instead of to just jump, because the way of the world is to just jump on something that you don't agree with or jump on something that you think is not justice. And God would have us think about that, think about the person, and
weigh up all
weigh
sides,
up everything instead of just
focus on unity, not division.
Because it's easier to just get angry straight away, easier to not obey than to think about it and try and get it right.
I think Jesus said something. We've spent a lot of time talking about the Beatitudes, haven't we? What did Jesus say? Blessed are the peacemakers.
Yeah.
What does he say? That I think that one is blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall inherit the earth. Is it? Let me just pull it up now.
Oh, that's a good one.
Blessed those who work for peace, for they will be called children of God.
Oh.
Okay, so that's a big one. So those who strive for peace, which is what you're just describing, you have
Yep.
a choice there to agitate things further, or to, Proverbs says, a soft answer turns away wrath.
Yes.
So give a soft answer. It lowers the level of angst, the level of wrath.
Yeah.
And it's kingdom. Yeah.
It is. It's what this is all about,
That's what
really.
this is about. This is saying, when you go into this land, I don't want you to be like the others. I want you to live by my standard and bring peace to the world.
Yeah. And we all have a land. I was sort of thinking we all have a land in our hearts, and we all have
we all have a land around us.
Yeah.
Our interactions with our friends and our church community and our family and so on.
I guess that's what I was striving to get to link in this Deuteronomy stuff, that Israel, for them back then, it was all about their land. They had to have the land. The land was important.
Yep.
But for us, we live on the land, but the land is more in our heart, or the land of our heart, or the land of our world.
Yep.
And
Yeah. And it does, look, don't say it doesn't, it's not that it doesn't apply to the physical land and the nation. And there's principles of stewarding the earth well and using the resources of the earth well. It definitely applies to that. And it also applies to the way we conduct ourselves in society and build up communities of people who love one another, etc.
Yes. Well, we've got a chapter we haven't. Are we going to 11 or 10?
I think it's 10, isn't it? 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Yeah.
Isn't it 5?
No, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Oh.
6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Have you prepared chapter
I've
11?
done 11.
Oh, really, Kenny? We're going to give a bonus chapter, are we?
No, we don't have to. God wants to follow us. God wants us to follow his example in every way, in holiness, love, and service. I like that. Verse 16, circumcise your hearts, therefore.
Okay. Circumcise the heart.
But then it says, and do not be stiff-necked any longer in the NLT version. I've written in my notes, but circumcise your heart.
So circumcise means to cut away.
Ah, okay.
That's what the word means, to cut away. So obviously to cut away the foreskin. So if you use that terminology to talk about, this is the first time it's used in this analogy of having a heart circumcised. Up until this point, it wasn't the heart.
Yeah.
Right? But at this point, Moses links the two together and says, you need to have your heart, the sinful, crusty part of your heart needs to be cut away so that you can be truly my children.
That's good.
That's what the word, and then Jeremiah will pick up on this later.
Yeah.
Many of the Old Testament prophets will pick up on the whole concept of circumcision of the heart. I think the Apostle Paul will talk about it in the New Testament too. That what really matters is the heart being circumcised, not having a genitalia circumcised for the purpose of identity in God's people. It's not those who are circumcised in the flesh, Paul will say. It's those who are circumcised of the heart who are truly God's people.
Nice. And so we can examine parts of our heart that we need to cut away and
Yep, exactly.
maybe that's what I have been doing lately.
Oh, it sounds like from what you're describing to me, that's exactly what you've been doing. And that's, Paul will say in the New Testament, study yourselves, consider yourselves to see if you're truly in the faith. He's constantly he's big on examination of our heart, taking that time to reflect, not just on our actions, but on the motives behind our actions.
Yeah.
Why do I do that?
Yes.
You know, I might just not be doing something bad, but why? What's my motive? Why am I doing that thing or not doing that thing? Because that's really the deep issues of the heart.
And why does that upset me? That's what I said.
Yeah, why does that upset me so
irk
much?
me? Because really it's just...
Why do I get frustrated about that thing so much? What's really going on inside me? It's like, what's the heart telling me? What's my heart telling me about that? And Moses is all big on that. That's what Deuteronomy is all about. When you go in there, what's your heart? What's really going on inside your life?
Yeah, I love it. The chapter finishes by declaring how awesome God is, and as always telling the Israelites to worship him and him alone, and to remember the miracles that have led them to where they are today. Remember, obey, remember over and over again.
Listen, Shema, remember, obey. Those 3 words are really, really big in all of this.
I like it. I think that's about it.
All right. Well, we're not going to do chapter 11.
No.
Now you got me thinking, were we supposed to be doing chapters 6 to 11 or were we supposed to be, 7 to 11 or were we supposed to be doing, I'm pretty sure we're doing chapters
Would you
6
like to
10.
pause and have a quick look?
Okay, let's pause. Unpause.
Unpause. I'm not doing chapter 11, but I did read it and
You did
put
read
some
it.
notes. So that's
Well
maybe
done.
that's up to me to
Well, maybe God's trying to tell
get
you
some gleaning off chapter 11.
Could be. And we are doing chapters 7 to 11 of John in our next time we sit down together. So maybe that's where the confusion was. Well,
I'm
that's
already
it.
nervous to do justice to John because I know it's a big book,
Well,
but I've
you'll
got
do
time
great.
to study.
You've got time to study. Hey, thank you, dear
Thank you,
listeners.
Pastor Rohan, and thank you, dear listeners, for listening to me rabbit on.
You did
again.
not rabbit, Kenny. You were fantastic. Great questions, great study. I'm inspired by the way you put your study together. All right, we're going to leave it there and we'll talk to you on next week's episode. Thanks, Kenny. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.